Hello friends, my name is Ryan. I'm going to tell you a story named The Teacher's Hidden Past, a Classroom Scandal, which is a very amazing story full of twists. So, let's start. The first day of school always brings an air of curiosity. Students whisper nervously, their gazes shifting between their new classmates and the imposing teacher's desk. In room 206, where sunlight barely filters through the grimy windows, the new English teacher, Mrs. Clara Henderson, stood at the front of the class. She was a woman in her late 40s, with perfectly combed chestnut hair and glasses that framed her piercing blue eyes. Mrs. Henderson had a calming presence. Her voice was steady, confident, and tinged with warmth as she introduced herself to the class. "I believe every story has a soul, and every soul has a story to tell. This year, we'll explore both." Her words hung in the air like an unspoken promise, and the students found themselves intrigued by her. Among them was a boy named Liam. Sharp-witted and always skeptical, Liam had a knack for noticing things others didn't. From the very first day, he felt there was something off about Mrs. Henderson. It wasn't her teaching, her lessons were impeccable. Nor was it her demeanor, she was kind and approachable. No, it was the way her gaze occasionally drifted to the window, as though she were waiting for something or someone. Weeks passed, and Mrs. Henderson quickly became a favorite. Her passion for literature was infectious, and her ability to weave life lessons into her lectures left an impression on everyone. But Liam couldn't shake his unease. One afternoon, as the class dissected a particularly intense poem, he noticed Mrs. Henderson's hands trembling slightly as she flipped through her notes. For a split second, he thought he saw fear in her eyes. He decided he needed answers. After class, Liam stayed behind under the pretense of needing help with an assignment. As Mrs. Henderson gathered her things, he casually remarked, "You seem like you've lived an interesting life, Mrs. Henderson. Ever thought about writing your own story?" She froze, her smile faltering. "Everyone has stories, Liam. Some are better left untold." Her cryptic reply only fueled Liam's curiosity. Over the next few days, he began subtly questioning his classmates, trying to piece together what he could about her past. Most didn't know much, but one girl, Emily, mentioned something curious. "I heard she moved here from another state, like really suddenly. Nobody knows why." The more Liam dug, the stranger things became. He overheard snippets of conversations in the teacher's lounge, rumors about Mrs. Henderson's previous job. A phrase caught his attention one day: "She's lucky she got out of that mess." What mess? Liam wondered. One evening, while browsing old-school newspapers in the library, Liam stumbled across a headline that made his heart race. "High school teacher accused in shocking scandal." The article described a story eerily similar to Mrs. Henderson, a talented English teacher at a prestigious school, suddenly resigning after allegations of misconduct. The accusations were vague, but they were enough to tarnish her reputation. The photo accompanying the article showed a younger version of Mrs. Henderson, her face pale and drawn. Liam's mind raced. Was it really her? Could the beloved teacher he knew be hiding such a dark secret? The next day, Liam confronted her after class. "Mrs. Henderson, I found something about a teacher, someone who looks like you, in an old article." "What happened?" Her face turned ashen, and for the first time, her composed demeanor cracked. "Liam, that's none of your concern. Sometimes the past should stay buried." But Liam couldn't let it go. That night, he confided in Emily, and together they decided to dig deeper. They discovered that the accusations against Mrs. Henderson had never been proven. In fact, there were inconsistencies in the story, witnesses who later recanted their statements and evidence that mysteriously disappeared. It seemed she had been framed, but why? Then, one evening, a stranger arrived in town. A man in a worn trench coat, with a face weathered by time, was seen loitering near the school. Liam spotted him watching Mrs. Henderson from across the street. His instinct screamed danger. The next day, during a particularly stormy afternoon, the school's power went out. Mrs. Henderson, visibly uneasy, decided to end the class early. As the students filed out, Liam lingered behind, pretending to tie his shoelace. He noticed her glance at the window, her hand trembling as she gripped her desk. "Mrs. Henderson, are you okay?" he asked gently. Before she could respond, the classroom door creaked open. The man in the trench coat stood there, his eyes cold and calculating. "Clara," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You can't hide forever." Liam's heart pounded. He instinctively stepped between the man and Mrs. Henderson. "Who are you? What do you want?" The man ignored him, his gaze fixed on Mrs. Henderson. "You know what you did. You ruined everything. And now it's time to pay." Mrs. Henderson's voice was barely a whisper. "I didn't do anything. It was you. You're the one who—" "Enough!" the man barked, advancing toward her. Without thinking, Liam grabbed a heavy book from a nearby desk and hurled it at the man. It struck him in the chest, momentarily stunning him. "Run!" Liam shouted to Mrs. Henderson. They sprinted down the dimly lit hallway, the man's footsteps echoing behind them. Just as they reached the main entrance, the school's security guard appeared, alerted by the commotion. The man in the trench coat fled into the stormy night, disappearing as quickly as he had arrived. In the days that followed, Mrs. Henderson confided in Liam and Emily. The man was a former colleague who had orchestrated the scandal to cover up his own crimes. She had uncovered his embezzlement scheme at their previous school, and when she threatened to expose him, he turned the tables, framing her instead. Fearing for her safety, she had moved to a new town, hoping to start fresh. The students rallied around her, and with their help, she decided to clear her name once and for all. Liam and Emily's parents, along with other supportive community members, helped her gather evidence to reopen the case. The truth finally came to light, and the man was arrested for his crimes. Mrs. Henderson's reputation was restored, but she decided to leave teaching. Sometimes, starting over means letting go, she told her students in her farewell speech. As Liam watched her walk away, he couldn't help but feel a mix of sadness and admiration. She had taught him more than literature, she had shown him the power of resilience and truth. And that, my friends, is the story of the teacher's hidden past, a classroom scandal. If you enjoyed this tale full of twists and suspense, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. See you next time.